I wasn't the bride, but somehow, I was the one he chose. The music was too loud, too perfect, like it was trying to convince everyone this was a fairy tale, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat, uneven and loud in my ears as I stood near the edge of the ballroom, fingers curled around a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched, watching someone else's perfect day unfold under crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. I wasn't supposed to stand out. That was the point. Soft pink dress, minimal makeup, quiet smile. Just another bridesmaid blending into a room full of people who belonged here, people who knew which fork to use, people who didn't check the price tag before buying anything, people who weren't counting rent in their heads while pretending to celebrate love. I shifted my weight from one heel to the other, the shoes already pinching after 2 hours, reminding me that I didn't fit here. Not really, not in this polished, glittering world. And then the doors opened, not dramatically, not with a crash, just a simple movement that somehow pulled every ounce of attention in the room like gravity had shifted. Conversations faltered, laughter softened, and I felt it before I saw him. That subtle, electric change in the air, the kind that makes your skin tighten without knowing why. I turned slowly, telling myself not to stare, but it was impossible not to. He walked in like he owned more than the building, like he owned the silence itself. Dark suit tailored so precisely it looked like it had been made for no one else, shoulders squared, movements calm, controlled, and everyone moved just slightly out of his path without being asked, without a word spoken. I didn't know his name, not yet, but I knew exactly what he was. Power, the kind that didn't need to prove itself, the kind that made people lower their voices and avoid eye contact. I should have looked away. I should have focused on the bride adjusting her veil, or the groom laughing too loudly at something I couldn't hear, but I didn't. My eyes stayed on him, and then his eyes found mine, and everything else disappeared. It wasn't dramatic. There was no gasp, no sudden music stop, just a moment, sharp and clear, where his gaze locked onto me like I was the only person in the room. My breath caught, stupid, involuntary, my fingers tightening around the glass as if that could anchor me. I wasn't special. I wasn't important. I wasn't even the one in white. So why was he looking at me like that? Like he had just made a decision. He moved then, not toward the altar, not toward the bride, but toward me. Each step measured, unhurried, unstoppable. And I felt my pulse spike. A warning I didn't understand. I glanced around quickly, expecting someone to intercept him, to redirect whatever mistake this was. But no one did. People simply stepped aside, pretending not to notice, pretending this was normal. Nothing about this felt normal. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the subtle scent of something expensive and clean. My throat went dry. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. His eyes flicked briefly to the bride behind me, then back to me, and there was something almost amused in his expression, like he'd found something unexpected, something better. Wrong bride, he said quietly, voice low, controlled, and for a second, relief rushed through me because yes, exactly, wrong person, you're mistaken, I don't belong in whatever world you're from. But then his gaze sharpened just slightly, and the corner of his mouth lifted in the faintest hint of something dangerous, but perfect, and before I could process what that meant, his hand closed gently but firmly around mine. Not rough, not forceful, just certain, like there was no version of reality where I said no. My breath hitched, my heart slammed against my ribs, and the room, my safe, predictable, borrowed world, tilted on its axis as he turned, expecting me to follow, as if it had already been decided, as if I had already agreed. And in that moment, standing between the life I understood and the one I didn't, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't asking. I should have pulled my hand away. I should have said something, anything, loud enough to break whatever spell had settled over the room. But my fingers stayed in his, my body following a step behind like I had forgotten how to choose for myself. Like something in me had already decided this moment mattered more than anything I was leaving behind. The music started again, soft and distant, like it belonged to another world entirely, and I caught glimpses of familiar faces as we moved. The bride frozen near the altar, confusion flickering across her expression, my friend Lily with her mouth slightly open, as if she was about to call my name but thought better of it. No one stopped us, no one asked questions, they just watched. And that was the part that made my chest tighten the most. Not him, not his grip, but the silence of everyone else, as if they all understood something I did not, as if I had already crossed a line I could not see. We stepped out into the night air, and it hit me all at once, cool against my skin, sharp enough to wake something inside me. I stopped, my heels scraping lightly against the pavement, forcing him to pause. "Wait," I said, my voice thinner than I wanted, barely steady. He turned his head slightly, not annoyed, not surprised, just patient, like he had expected this moment, like he was giving me exactly one chance to speak. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "You have the wrong person." It sounded obvious, small, even to my own ears, but it was all I had, all I could cling to. His gaze dropped briefly to where our hands were still connected, then lifted back to my face, calm, assessing, and something in his expression shifted. Not doubt, never doubt, just a quiet certainty that made my pulse stutter. "I know exactly who you are," he said, and the way he said it made my stomach twist, because it did not sound like a guess, it sounded like a fact. I shook my head, instinctively, my free hand tightening at my side. "No, you do not. I am just a bridesmaid. I am not part of whatever this is." I gestured vaguely behind us, toward the glowing windows, toward the life I understood, even if I did not fully belong to it. He followed the movement with his eyes for a fraction of a second before returning his attention to me, and for the first time, I noticed how still he was, how controlled every movement seemed, like nothing about him was accidental. "Exactly," he said quietly, and that single word landed heavier than anything else he could have said before I could ask what that meant. A black car pulled up to the curb, smooth and silent, the kind of car that did not need to announce itself. The driver stepped out immediately, opening the back door without a word, without looking at me, as if this had been arranged long before I even knew something was happening. My heart started racing again, louder now, sharper, cutting through the night air. This was the moment, the real one, the moment where I could pull away, where I could step back and run inside and pretend none of this had happened. I took a small step backward, testing the space between us, testing myself. His hand loosened just enough to let me feel the possibility of leaving, but not enough to let me forget he was still there, still watching. "You can go back," he said, his voice even, giving me an out, a choice, but something about the way he said it made it feel less like freedom and more like a test. I hesitated, my mind racing through every logical reason to walk away. This was insane, dangerous, completely outside anything I should be stepping into, and yet, my feet did not move. My gaze flickered past him to the reflection in the car window, catching a glimpse of myself in the glass, soft pink dress, nervous eyes. Someone who had spent her whole life trying not to be noticed, trying not to take up space. And then I looked back at him, at the way he stood there like the world bent around his decisions, and something inside me shifted, small but undeniable. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders tightening. "If I get in that car," I said, my voice steadier now, surprising even me, "I want to understand why." His eyes held mine for a long second, measuring, weighing, and then he gave the slightest nod, like I had just said the only thing that mattered. "Then get in," he replied, simple, final, and this time, when he guided me forward, I did not resist. The door closed with a soft, decisive click that sounded louder than it should have, like it sealed something behind me that I could not reopen. And for a moment, I just sat there, hands folded tightly in my lap, staring straight ahead at the tinted glass as the car pulled away from the curb with a smooth, effortless motion, the wedding venue shrinking in the reflection until it disappeared completely, and with it, everything familiar, everything safe. I swallowed, my throat dry, my pulse still uneven as I became aware of him sitting beside me, not too close, not touching, but undeniably present. The space between us charged in a way that made it hard to breathe normally. I forced myself to look out the window, counting streetlights as we passed them. 1, 2, 3. Anything to ground myself in something simple, something predictable. But nothing about this felt predictable. Not the silence, not the direction we were heading, not the man who had just taken me from a room full of people without a single objection. After what felt like minutes or maybe hours, I finally turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at him. He was watching me, not in a way that felt invasive, but in a way that felt deliberate, like he was studying a detail he had already memorized. My breath caught again, softer this time. Less panic, more awareness. You said I would understand. I said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched too long, my voice steadier than I felt. He did not answer immediately, his gaze holding mine for a second, longer before shifting forward, toward the road ahead, as if choosing his words carefully. You asked for the truth, he said, calm, measured, and the truth requires patience. I frowned slightly, the answer not satisfying. Not enough, my fingers tightening again. That is not an answer, I said, more firmly this time. He exhaled slowly, not annoyed, just acknowledging, and then he leaned back slightly in his seat, one hand resting loosely against the armrest, completely at ease, completely in control. 10 minutes before I walked into that room, he began, his voice low but clear. I had every intention of speaking to the bride. My stomach twisted at that, a strange, unexpected reaction I could not explain. I nodded once, encouraging him to continue, needing to understand where I fit into any of this. It was an arrangement, he continued. Something that made sense on paper. His eyes flicked to me briefly, and there was something almost unreadable in them. But then I saw you. My breath slowed, just slightly, my attention sharpening. Doing what? I asked, because I needed something concrete, something real. He paused again, like he was replaying the moment in his mind. You were standing near the edge of the room, he said, watching everyone else celebrate something you did not believe in. The accuracy of it made my chest tighten, and I did not know why. You looked like you were trying to disappear, he added quietly, and that hit deeper than I expected, because it was true, painfully true. I looked down at my hands, at the way my fingers twisted together, a habit I had never been able to break. And that is why you took me? I asked, the question coming out softer now, less defensive, more searching. He shook his head once, a small, precise movement. No, he said, and then his gaze returned to mine, steady, unwavering. I chose you because you were the only person in that room who was not pretending. The words settled between us, heavy and unexpected, and for a moment, I did not know how to respond, because no one had ever said something like that to me before, not in a way that felt like it mattered. The car slowed as it turned onto a quieter street, the city lights dimming slightly, and I realized we were getting farther from anything I recognized. A flicker of uncertainty returned, sharp and immediate. And now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His expression did not change, but there was something final in the way he answered, something that made my pulse pick up again, not from fear this time, but from something I could not quite name. Now, he said calmly, you find out what it means to be chosen. The car slowed before I realized we had stopped, the motion so smooth it felt like we had simply drifted out of the city and into something quieter, something more controlled. I glanced out the window, and my breath caught, not from fear this time, but from the sheer scale of what I was seeing. The gates alone were taller than anything I had ever stood next to, black iron stretching upward, intricate but unwelcoming. They opened without hesitation as the car approached, as if we had been expected, as if there had never been a question about whether I would come here. I felt it again, that subtle tightening in my chest. The awareness that I was stepping into a world that operated on rules I did not understand. The car rolled forward along a long driveway lined with perfectly trimmed trees, each one identical, each one placed with intention, the kind of precision that made everything feel deliberate, planned, controlled. And then the house came into view, and calling it a house felt wrong. It was something closer to an estate, wide and imposing, with tall windows glowing softly against the night, not flashy, not overwhelming in a loud way, but quietly powerful, like it did not need to prove anything to anyone. The car came to a stop near the front entrance, and for a moment, neither of us moved. I became aware of my own breathing again, slow but heavy, like my body was trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. This is where you live? I asked, my voice softer now, less resistance, more disbelief. He nodded once, unbothered by the question, as if the answer was obvious, as if there was nowhere else he could exist. The driver stepped out and opened the door, the cool air brushing against my skin again, and this time, I hesitated, my hand resting lightly against the seat, not ready to step out just yet, because stepping out meant something. It meant crossing another line, another invisible boundary that I would not be able to undo. He noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. "You can still walk away," he said, his voice calm. Not pushing, not pulling, just stating a fact. And that was what made it harder, because it felt like a real choice, not an illusion. I looked past him, back down the driveway, imagining myself running, heels in hand, dress catching against my legs, trying to make it back to the gate, trying to explain to someone what had just happened, trying to return to a life that had already started to feel distant, smaller somehow, like it belonged to someone else. My chest tightened again. But this time it was not fear holding me in place. It was something quieter, something more complicated. I exhaled slowly and shook my head, barely noticeable, but enough for him to understand. His expression did not change, but there was a shift, subtle, almost invisible, like a piece of a larger plan had just fallen into place. He stepped out first, straightening slightly as he moved, and for a second, I just watched him. The way he carried himself, the way everything around him seemed to adjust without needing instruction. Then I followed, my heels touching the ground with a soft sound that felt too loud in the quiet night. The front doors opened before we reached them. Two people standing just inside, not speaking, just waiting, and again, that same realization settled in. Nothing here happened by accident. Everything was anticipated. Everything was prepared for. I stepped inside and the warmth wrapped around me immediately. The interior just as controlled as the outside. Clean lines, neutral tones, everything placed exactly where it should be. No clutter, no chaos, no sign of hesitation. I felt out of place again, not because of the space itself, but because of how certain it all felt. Like there was no room for doubt here, no room for second guessing. I turned slightly, my gaze finding his again, needing something. Anything that felt real in the middle of all this precision. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice quieter than before, but steady. He paused for just a second, long enough to make me realize that this answer mattered, long enough to make me feel like I was about to step into something irreversible. And then he looked at me, really looked at me, like he had been waiting for this exact question. "Now," he said, his voice low, certain, "you stop trying to leave a life that was never meant for you, and you start learning the one that is." I did not answer him right away because I was not sure if there was an answer that would not sound like surrender. His words lingered in the air between us, calm and certain, as if he had already decided what my life should look like and was simply waiting for me to catch up. I crossed my arms instinctively, not to challenge him, but to hold on to something that still felt like mine. "You talk like this is already decided," I said, my voice quieter but sharper now. He did not react the way most people would. No irritation, no need to correct me. Just that same steady attention that made me feel like every word I said was being measured. "It is not decided," he replied. Evenly. "You are here because you chose to stay." The reminder hit differently than I expected. Not controlling, not forceful, just true. And that made it harder to push back against. I looked around again, taking in the space more carefully this time. The quiet, the order, the absence of anything unnecessary. It felt less like a home and more like a place where everything had a purpose, including me. And that thought made my stomach tighten. "And what exactly am I supposed to be here?" I asked, because that question mattered more than anything else. He stepped a little closer, not enough to invade my space, just enough that I could feel the shift, the focus narrowing. "You are not here to be anything for me," he said, and for the first time, there was something almost deliberate in the way he chose those words, like he knew how they would land. I frowned slightly, confused, because nothing about this felt like freedom. "Then why am I here?" I pressed, needing something solid, something that made sense. He studied me for a second longer, and then he did something unexpected. He stepped back, creating distance instead of closing it. "Because you have spent your entire life making yourself smaller to fit into places that never deserved you," he said, his voice still low, still controlled, but carrying a weight that made my chest tighten again. I shook my head immediately. The reaction automatic, defensive. "You do not know anything about my life," I said quickly. But even as the words left my mouth, they felt weaker than I wanted them to. He did not argue. He did not list facts or prove me wrong. He simply held my gaze, calm and unshaken. "I know enough," he said quietly. And somehow that was worse, because it left space for doubt, for the possibility that he was not entirely wrong. I looked away first, my eyes dropping to the polished floor beneath us, the reflection staring back at me, smaller than I remembered, uncertain in a way I did not like seeing. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, trying to pull back control. "You still have not told me what happens next," I said, softer now. Less resistance, more need for clarity. He nodded once, as if he had been waiting for me to circle back to that. "Next," he said, "you rest." I blinked, the answer so simple it almost felt like a trick. "Rest?" I repeated, unsure if I had heard him correctly. He gestured slightly toward the hallway behind me, where soft lighting stretched into a quiet space I had not noticed before. "You have been reacting to everything since the moment I walked into that room," he explained. "And you cannot make decisions like that." There was no pressure in his tone, no demand, just a quiet expectation, and that, more than anything, unsettled me, because it meant he was not trying to force me into anything immediate. He was giving me time, and time meant I would have to face this without panic, without excuses. I hesitated, my instincts pulling in two different directions, part of me still wanting to question, to push, to understand everything right now, and another part, quieter but persistent, recognizing how exhausted I felt, how much had happened in such a short time. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders lowering slightly as the tension eased just enough to think clearly. "And if I decide I do not belong here?" I asked, one last attempt to define the edges of whatever this was. He did not hesitate this time. "Then I will take you back," he said simply. And there was no hesitation, no hidden meaning, just a statement that felt as solid as everything else about him. I searched his expression for a moment, looking for doubt, for something that suggested he might change his mind. But there was nothing, just that same steady certainty. And for reasons I could not fully explain, I believed him, not because I trusted him yet, but because nothing he had done so far felt uncertain. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him, and turned toward the hallway, each step quieter than the last, aware that whatever came next, it would not be decided by fear anymore, but by something far more dangerous: choice. I did not realize how tired I was until the door closed behind me, the quiet settling in like something physical, pressing gently against my thoughts until they slowed. The room was larger than my entire apartment back home, but it did not feel overwhelming. It felt intentional, like everything inside it had been chosen for a reason. The bed was perfectly made, the soft lighting casting a warm glow against neutral walls. Nothing too bold, nothing too distracting, just calm, controlled, and for a moment, I stood near the door, unsure of what to do with the silence, unsure of what to do with myself now that no one was watching. No one was expecting anything from me. I took a few steps forward, my heels sinking slightly into the thick carpet, the unfamiliar softness making me feel off balance, like I had stepped into someone else's life without permission. I reached down and slipped off the shoes, setting them carefully by the edge of the bed. The relief immediate, small but grounding. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering as the tension I had been carrying all night began to ease, piece by piece. I walked toward the window, drawn by the faint glow outside, the view stretching farther than I expected, the city lights distant now, quieter, like they belonged to a different version of my life. I pressed my fingers lightly against the cool glass, trying to make sense of how quickly everything had changed, how a single moment had redirected everything I thought I understood. I closed my eyes briefly, replaying it, the music, the silence, his voice, the way he had looked at me like I was not invisible, like I was not something easy to overlook. My chest tightened at the memory, not from fear, but from something I could not quite name. I pulled back from the window and turned slowly, taking in the room again. The space felt safe, not because I trusted it, but because nothing in it felt chaotic. Nothing felt unpredictable, and that alone was enough to make me pause. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting in my lap, staring down at them as if they might give me answers. They did not. Of course, they just trembled slightly, a delayed reaction finally catching up to me. I let out a quiet breath, then another, trying to steady myself, trying to separate what I felt from what I thought I should feel. This was not how my life was supposed to go. There was no version of my plans that included stepping into a stranger's world because he decided I belonged there. And yet, I had not been forced. That was the part one could not ignore. I had been given a choice, more than once, and each time I had stayed. I leaned back slightly, my hands pressing into the soft fabric of the bed, grounding myself in something real, something immediate. Why did I stay? I whispered to the empty room, the question sounding different when spoken out loud, heavier, more honest. I knew the logical answers: curiosity, shock, the inability to process what was happening fast enough to react properly. But none of those felt complete. None of them explained the quiet pull I had felt when I looked at him, the way something in me had responded before I could think it through. I shook my head lightly, as if that might clear it, as if that might bring me back to something familiar, but it did not. Instead, it left me sitting there, caught between two versions of myself. The one who had always stayed quiet, stayed safe, stayed small, and the one who had stepped into a car without knowing where it would take her. I drew in a slow breath and pushed myself up from the bed, pacing the room once, twice, needing movement, needing something to break the stillness. My gaze landed on the door again, and for a moment, I considered it, the simple act of walking out, of finding him and telling him this was a mistake, that I needed to go back, that none of this made sense. But my feet did not move. Instead, I stopped in the center of the room, my hands falling to my sides, and realized something that unsettled me more than anything else had so far. I was not frozen because I was afraid to leave. I was standing still because part of me wanted to understand what would happen if I stayed. Sleep did not come the way I expected it to. It did not fall over me like a wave or pull me under into something quiet and still. Instead, it hovered just out of reach, my body heavy against the mattress while my mind refused to settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same moment again. The way he had looked at me, the way the room had gone silent without anyone saying a word, the way I had not pulled away. I turned onto my side, then onto my back, the sheets too smooth, too unfamiliar. Like even rest required permission here. After what felt like hours, I gave up trying, pushing myself up slowly and sitting at the edge of the bed. The room just as quiet as before, unchanged, untouched, like time had paused the moment I stepped inside. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling softly, and stood, my bare feet sinking into the carpet again as I moved toward the door. This time I did not hesitate. I opened it carefully. The hallway beyond dimly lit, stretching in both directions. With the same controlled stillness as everything else in this place, I stepped out, closing the door behind me with a soft click, the sound echoing slightly before disappearing. I was not sure what I expected to find. Maybe someone watching, maybe someone stopping me, but there was nothing, just silence, just space. I walked slowly, my steps measured, listening to the faint rhythm of my own breathing, my heart no longer racing, just steady, alert. I followed the hallway until it opened into a larger space, the main living area I had passed through earlier, but it felt different now, darker, quieter, the lights dimmed to a soft glow, shadows stretching across clean lines and polished surfaces, and then I saw him. He was standing near one of the tall windows, his back partially turned, one hand resting lightly in his pocket, the other holding a glass of something dark, untouched. He did not move when I entered, did not turn immediately, and for a second, I wondered if he had not noticed me. But then he spoke, his voice low, steady. "You are not asleep." It was not a question. I stopped a few feet away, folding my arms lightly, more out of habit than defense. I could say the same thing. I replied, my voice quieter in the stillness of the room. He turned then, slowly, his gaze finding mine without hesitation, without surprise, like he had been expecting me to come looking for him. He set the glass down on the table beside him without breaking eye contact, a small, controlled movement that somehow felt deliberate. "I do not sleep much," he said, and there was no pride in it, no complaint, just a simple fact. I nodded once, unsure what to do with that, unsure what to do with any of this. The distance between us felt different now, not charged in the same sharp way as before, but not neutral either. Something quieter, something more aware. I took a small step closer, not thinking too much about it, just following the instinct to not stand so far away. "You said I would understand," I said, bringing the conversation back to something that mattered, something unfinished. His expression did not change, but there was a shift in his focus, sharper now, more intent. And you will, he replied calmly, but not all at once. I frowned slightly, the answer frustrating in its simplicity. You keep saying that like it is supposed to make sense, I said, and this time there was a hint of something else in my tone. Not fear, not exactly, more like impatience. Like I was starting to push back in a way I had not before. He did not seem bothered by it. If anything, there was the faintest trace of approval in the way he studied me. You are used to understanding everything before you move, he said, his voice even. That is how you stay safe. The words landed quietly, but they hit something deeper than I expected. I held his gaze, refusing to look away this time. And what if I do not want to stay safe? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, before I could soften it. His eyes sharpened slightly at that, not in warning, but in recognition, like I had just stepped into something real, something that mattered more than anything else we had said so far. The silence stretched for a second, maybe two, and then he took a slow step closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough to shift the space between us again. Then you stop asking for guarantees, he said quietly, and you start paying attention to what you feel instead of what you expect. My breath caught, softer this time, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was saying, from the way it stripped away the excuses I had been holding on to. I stood there, still, my thoughts slowing, rearranging, trying to catch up, and for the first time since I had stepped into this house, I realized something that changed everything just a little. I was not here because he forced me to stay. I was here because I had not yet found a reason strong enough to leave. His words stayed with me long after he stopped speaking, not loud, not overwhelming, just present in a way that made everything else quieter. I did not respond right away because I was not sure how to, not without giving away more than I was ready to admit. So I did what I had always done. I observed. I studied him the same way he studied everything around him, trying to understand where the control ended and where something real began. You talk like you already know what I feel, I said. Finally, my voice calm but careful, testing the ground between us. He did not deny it, did not correct me, just held my gaze with that same steady focus. I know what you are not feeling, he replied, and that answer caught me off guard, my brow furrowing slightly. And what is that? I asked. He took a moment, not because he needed to think, but because he chose his words with intention. You are not afraid of me, he said quietly, the certainty in his tone making my breath pause for half a second. I opened my mouth to argue, to correct him, but the words did not come as easily as they should have, because he was right, or at least, not wrong. I had felt fear earlier, sharp and instinctive, but it had faded too quickly, replaced by something else, something more complicated. I exhaled slowly, my arms loosening at my sides as I processed that. Maybe I should be, I said instead, softer now, more honest than I intended. His expression did not change, but there was a shift in the way he looked at me, less distant, more focused. Maybe, he agreed, and that simple acknowledgement made my chest tighten in a way I did not expect, because it meant he was not trying to convince me otherwise. He was not trying to make himself seem safe. He was simply letting me decide what that meant. The silence settled again, but it felt different this time, less tense, more deliberate, like a space being given instead of something waiting to be filled. I took another step closer without thinking, closing the distance just enough to feel the difference, to test what changed when I did not keep my space. His gaze followed the movement, attentive but not reactive, as if he was allowing me to set the pace. And that realization shifted something inside me. Small but undeniable. I was not being pulled forward. I was moving on my own. You said I was not pretending, I said, bringing the conversation back to where it had started, to the reason I was standing here instead of somewhere else. What if I do not know who I am without that? The question came out quieter than I expected, but it felt heavier, more real, because it was not about him anymore. It was about me. He watched me for a moment, really watched me. Like he was considering not just the words, but everything behind them. Then you find out, he said simply, and there was no hesitation, no complexity, just a clear direction that left no room for hiding. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite, because it sounded so easy when he said it, like identity was something you could just decide to uncover. And you think this place is going to help with that? I asked, glancing briefly around the room, at the controlled space, the quiet, the absence of anything uncertain. He followed my gaze for a fraction of a second before returning to me. No, he said, and the honesty of that answer made me pause. I think you will, he added, and something in the way he said it made it land differently. Not as pressure, not as expectation, but as a statement of belief that I was not used to hearing. I looked at him, really looked this time. Past the control, past the certainty, searching for something that explained why he had chosen me, why he had walked into that room and changed everything without a second thought. Why me? I asked, the question finally coming out the way it had been building all night. He did not look away, did not soften the answer. Because you did not look at me the way everyone else did, he said quietly. You did not see power or fear or anything you were supposed to see. His voice lowered slightly, not in volume, but in intensity. You saw me, and you did not look away. My breath caught again, softer now, deeper, because I remembered that moment, the way I had not moved, the way something had held me there without explanation. The silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt different, not uncertain, not tense, just full, like something had shifted into place without either of us forcing it. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized that maybe this was not about being taken from somewhere. Maybe it was about being seen in a way I had never allowed before. For a moment, neither of us moved, the space between us holding something unspoken, something that did not need to be rushed or explained. I felt it in the way my breathing slowed, in the way the tension I had carried since the beginning of the night no longer pressed so sharply against my chest. It was still there, but it had changed, softer now, less like fear and more like awareness. I looked at him, really looked this time without trying to categorize or understand, just seeing what was in front of me, the control, the stillness, the quiet certainty that had unsettled me from the moment he walked into that room. And yet, beneath all of that, there was something else, something I had not recognized at first, not softness, not vulnerability, but intention. Everything about him was intentional, including me, and that realization should have made me step back, should have reminded me how easily this could go wrong. But it did not. Instead, it made me stand still, grounded in a way I had not expected. So what happens if I stay? I asked, the question coming out without hesitation now, not driven by fear, not driven by confusion, but by something steadier, something closer to choice. His gaze did not shift, did not waver, as if he had been waiting for that exact question from the moment I stepped into this house. Then you stop standing at the edge of your own life, he said quietly, and the words landed deeper than anything else he had said so far, because they were not about him. They were about me, about every moment I had held back, every time I had chosen to be invisible. Because it was easier than being seen, I exhaled slowly, my fingers brushing lightly against my arm, grounding myself in something physical as my thoughts settled into place. And if I leave? I asked, needing to hear it again, needing to test the reality of the choice he kept offering. He did not hesitate, not even for a second. Then I take you back, he said, just as simply as before. No resistance, no condition, just a fact. I searched his expression again, looking for any sign that he would change his mind, any hint that the choice was not as real as he made it sound. But there was nothing, just that same unwavering certainty. And for the first time, I understood something. Clearly, this was not about control in the way I had assumed. It was about direction, about stepping into something instead of being pushed into it. I let out a quiet breath, my shoulders relaxing just slightly as the weight of the decision settled. It was still heavy, still complicated, but it was mine, completely mine. I glanced toward the window, the darkness outside stretching wide and open, the world I had known still there, still waiting if I chose to return to it. And then I looked back. At him, at the man who had walked into a room full of people and seen something no one else had bothered to notice. My heart beat steadily now, not racing, not uncertain, just present. You said I did not look away, I said softly, repeating his words, needing to understand what he saw in that moment. What made me different from everyone else? He nodded once, his expression unchanged but his focus sharp. You did not, he confirmed. I tilted my head slightly, considering that. Considering what? It meant to be seen. and to see in return. Then maybe that goes both ways, I said, the words coming more easily now, more certain. His eyes held mine, and for a brief second, something shifted there, subtle but real, like recognition, like something aligning without effort. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, steady, like the beginning of something that did not need to be rushed. I took a small step back, not to create distance, but to breathe, to feel the space around me, to make sure I was not standing here out of habit or hesitation, but because I wanted to. And when I looked at him again, there was no uncertainty left in the way I held his gaze. "I am not ready to leave," I said quietly, and the truth of it settled in my chest the moment the words left my mouth. Not heavy, not overwhelming, just right. His expression did not change, but there was a finality in the way he nodded, not ownership, not control, just acknowledgement, like he understood exactly what that choice meant. "Good," he said, his voice low, steady, and for the first time, it did not sound like a command. It sounded like an answer. I let out a slow breath, my eyes drifting briefly toward the quiet space around us before returning to him. And somewhere between the silence, the distance, and the choice I had just made, I realized something that stayed with me long after that moment passed. He did not take me from that wedding. I walked away from it. And somehow, that made all the difference.